Good evening. You're listening live to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Tonight with me, we're covering Nighthawks from 1981, the Sylvester Stallone, Rutger Hauer, Billy Dee Williams, Lindsay, Wagner. Great serious buddy cop movie that doesn't get enough love, especially from the Stallone catalog here. I'm joined by RDV as usual on Tuesday nights for an action film like this. And RDV, I got to sit there and tell you, I hadn't seen this film in probably 20, 30 years at least. I always remembered it being a good film. Just had no urge to see it. It never seemed like it was on TV or Netflix or anything. It's not really widely available currently, but I had happened to have my own personal copy that I went back and watched it today, and I have to tell you, I forgot how good of a film this really is. I'm not saying it's the best film out of Stallone's catalog, but it's up there. It's high quality. There's so many positive things to say about this too. That I'm looking forward to just diving right into this here in a moment. But as we get started and people start rolling in for tonight's discussion on Nighthawks, what's your initial impression?
This is I'd probably hold up there one of the best movies you see with cops and Stallone, and just I'd say it's right up there with Dirty Harry. It's one of those movies if it stands by itself, you don't need a sequel to this, and that's what's great about that. I always said the Dirty Harry movies, I don't think they really needed to do sequels, but they did sequels. This movie is dark. It's gritty. It's not overhyped, as far as it doesn't have unbelievable stuff. This felt real. This felt like, and it was made on a budget of $5 million. So I guess back then that was still a lot of money, but yeah, this is a movie you really don't see ever, even out for sale or on Blu-ray or people who are Stallone fans. Maybe they might have heard this movie, but they don't remember it. And you don't see. Like I said, you can. I was looking up now. I was going to see where's the streaming even. I guess you can stream it through Apple TV, Google, iTunes, Amazon, YouTube, and Vudu, but they're all $4 though. Right. So at least it's available for streaming, because I have it on Vudu. And this is a fun movie, and it's Rutger Hauer. I love Rutger Hauer playing the bad guys. I loved him, and that's what kind of made was my favorite part of Blade Runner was Rutger Hauer at that fight scene at the end. Mm-hmm. And you kind of get something similar to that in this movie, as far as he's like unhinged. He thinks, and I love this too. The whole interaction between those two, it's like Rutger Hauer's like, I'm smarter than you, and you got Stallone, who basically his character DaSilva is like, you're a punk, and I'm going to. You're almost getting that what's that movie, Cobra feeling.
Cobra, yeah.
Yes, and that's what I loved about that. I was like, oh, this is awesome because I love Cobra. So watching this is great, and this was my first time watching all the way through. I've seen it before once, in parts, but never all the way through. Never sat down. So when I sat down early today and I watched this, I was just like, this is great. You don't need big names in this, to make a movie that's great. And that's what proves about, because now Hollywood is all about, big special effects. We see with the Mission Impossible movies, even back then with the Golden Eye, with Pierce Brosnan. This, you didn't have that many special effects. Yes, you had the guns, you had the blanks and stuff, but a lot of it was was foot chasing,
Yes.
Which is great because it gets your adrenaline flowing when you're watching movies like this, the action and stuff. I love it.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's a film that growing up, I remember seeing Rocky as a kid. It's one of the very first movies that I ever actually saw that I remember. And so I sort of kind of knew the name and sort of knew his face. So by the time Rocky 2 came out, loved that film as well. And around the late 70s, early 80s, of course, Star Wars is a big hit, Jaws, all these movies. You start, for me as a kid growing up at that time, start following people just because, it's the person from this or the person from that. And so when this movie came on, I'm like, oh, here's Billy Dee Williams, that smooth Colt 45 guy, as we'd come to know if you grew up in the 80s and saw the commercials. That guy reeks charisma. Yes, he's black, but you know what? He's not like a sidekick goofy ass number two guy that's there for comic relief. He holds his own. He could be the lead, and Stallone could be the backup. That's how strong he is. You have Stallone's wife in here, played by Lindsay Wagner, the Bionic Woman. Okay, if you grew up, you watch the Bionic Man, you watch the Bionic Woman, you watch the 1970s Incredible Hulk shows. I think, even though we haven't discussed those live here on the Xtreme Movie Show to this point, there's something to be said about 70s television. One of the greatest things about this film, though, is that I say it's a serious kind of buddy film. It's not necessarily about the relationship, but they work so well together. And the point you made about Rutger Hauer, I think, is really the key thing here that drives it all. When you have a terrorist, which this movie has Rutger Hauer playing it, and you see that early on with bombs going off and everything else, you're immediately sucked into how serious they treat this idea of urban combat, which was not really that big of a deal in American film back then. It certainly predated a lot of, let's say, incidences here in the United States that we haven't had yet to that point. And so when you start off by showing a city in its own right, New York City, which had really been a crap hole 70s and 80s for a very long time, and it's turning back into that now. When you watch this film, it's shot on location. There's nothing fancy. It's all close-up shots. But when you see stuff in the background, you see where they're in like north of Harlem or whatever, let's say, or wherever out they're at in the Bronx. You see the old burnt out, crappy ass buildings from riots from the 60s and 70s, much like we had the riots in 2020 and maybe this summer as well we'll have. So it was interesting that you saw films that captured literally what the streets looked like, all the seedy stuff in the background where they were at. This was not a fancy, clean looking movie. To your point, it's gritty, it's gutty, it's grimy, it's everything that you want because it feels real. You feel like you're walking the streets with them, and you have that hint of danger with it. And the fact that early on you get somebody that you don't even know who's European, which is almost even more unknowable, especially if you're growing up as in an American and you didn't really like commies or the Japs at the time, as they would say. To have a European bomber and it be a part of their history and this guy's character was a smart move. It's a movie that's kind of ahead of its time with it. And it's just great performances all the way around. And I agree with you. And not having seen it for myself in a very long time, even though it's a second, third watch for me, I found this movie to be fantastic. Let's just talk about some of the scenes and just start kind of from the beginning. Early on, you see Stallone, he's got the beard going. He's rocking those real nice sniper tint sort of glasses. You see Billy Dee Williams with it too. Like I said, they're not smiling. But when you start seeing the scenes of the explosions and you see the suitcase type bombs going into the stores, again, not having seen all this as a kid, I'm like, what the hell is going on? But you realize, hey, it's a bad guy. And here's where they really, I think, did it well. Rutger Hauer got plenty of screen time in here, but he didn't have to say a lot. He didn't have to act goofy.
Oh, he is more creep that way.
Yeah, but it's also not just, he's an intelligent, smart guy. He didn't have to sit there and rant on and on and on to justify his position to us as audience members watching the show about why he's doing what he's doing. I don't care. You're a bastard. You're a bad guy. You may have your reasons, but they took a less is more approach, I think, with him in here by just showing you how all the cops formed this new attack force and pulled Stallone and Billy Dee Williams into it and started talking about things you need to look for because, hey, you cops aren't ready for this sort of international terrorist type of training. So here's some quick things you need to know. And so they end up using some as they go on. And it really gave an element of realism that, like you said, to this point, a lot of films these days don't have it. You're so far removed from dealing with that. And even a superhero film where everyone's got powers, to me, they're unrealistic because you can't identify them with them. Immediately, again, guys, boots on the ground, checking things out. It really is almost kind of a half detective movie in a way.
Yeah, and Stallone proved he can make a great movie without having to do Rambo.
Absolutely.
He doesn't have to show off skin. Doesn't have to show off his muscles and all his gun, his arms and all. He just, is a no-nonsense cop. And I said, coming off of watching 3 Days of the Condor, which came out 5 years before this, or 6 years before it, 1975, which is another movie, I just love 70s, just cops and robbers, or just spy stuff, because there's no smartphones, and it's just refreshing to see something where you're it's actually more believable. Nobody's seen this guy, Rutger Hauer. He's a terrorist. Why? Because nobody has smartphones. There's no cameras everywhere to take photos of these people. People were smart. There was you couldn't track them by a cell phone. He went to a payphone, he called there, and then he left.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have like the technology to do all this stuff like everybody thinks they do. They would know today. And he didn't need it because people back then were smart. The cops they had put in there, the detectives doing that stuff, they weren't, because Hollywood has a thing where they want to dumb down the police force, to make one guy a super cop, and I didn't get that from this movie.
No, absolutely not. You got, I think, I really talk about how strong the film is when both Billy Dee Williams and Stallone are on screen together. They definitely seem like a unit that's spent a lot of time together, and you can't replace that. And there's the scene early on where, everyone likes to joke, oh, this is the one where he dresses up as an old lady, it's the introductory thing, and beats up people, and he pulls his thing off his head or whatever like that, and you're like, oh, okay, haha. It's not a funny thing, it's not quite entrapment, but he's luring out the scumbags there so you see what's going on. But pretty much about 10-15 minutes in, there's a scene where he and Billy Dee Williams are going and doing a drug raid basically, and just when you look at the room that they go into, you go, this looks for the most part like a real room, like a real drug place. It's not clean or like that, and it's just it's just so disgusting. It's like, this is how the real world is. But when you see a show like, say, Ozark on Netflix, which I think is a very good show, and I enjoy watching it tremendously, it still seems a little too clean. Even if they're dealing with meth or whatever, it doesn't have that grind that this movie has here, too. And maybe it's some of the shots of them on top of the roofs and all the decaying buildings and graffiti and everything else there too. It was just such a great scene early on that really just they continue that all the way through this film.
They're going through. They're in the Bronx. That's where they were at. And like I said, it's those old historic buildings like that. It's cold there. It's dark. It's gloomy. It's not happy. You don't see a lot of people. And just like I said, it's the New York is. When I think of crime, I think of New York. I think of the 70s New York. And then just because, like I said, like it feels old school the way the buildings are and stuff in there. There's no new stuff like they probably have now. It'd be like Madison Square Garden if they showed them over there. It's where they filmed it in the more older, like the more actual places where there were crime, because 70s New York was horrible. And it's still in parts today. You don't want to go into in parts of New York where there are gangs. But it's not as bad as it was. But I mean, like, I guess it's getting there now. But like I said, the atmosphere really sets the mood. And like I said, a lot of people would say this movie would be like a Stallone movie, and I'd say it's wrong. It's a Stallone Billy Dee Williams movie, because they both are pretty much treated equally throughout this film. Like I said, that's what makes it more stand out more than like say like watching like Die Hard or like Commando or like that stuff, or even Stallone's other movies like Rambo or Cobra. Cobra was kind of like a one-man army.
It's a goof 80s film, but we like it and we enjoy it. This film was not that.
As I said, this is serious. This kind of felt like the original Dirty Harry movie.
Well, one of the things too in this film that's pretty good is like, we talk about the realism. There's another scene a little bit later on where they're working their angle, he and Billy Dee Williams, and he's going, it looks like Central Park, and he's going underneath a little area, and he knows the bad guys are trying to come in at him, but this police car pulls up, and they're basically saying, hey, the chief wants you, whatever like that. This is when they're getting pulled off whatever assignment they're working on to be assigned to this new unit. And they're really, really hot because they really busted them in the middle of not an exercise, but of a potential sting here. And they really go at it, and they're kind of shoving each other and this and that. And it's like really believable. Whereas today you go, oh, you see a bunch of people staring out their cell phones out, with people say, hey, if you touch me, there's going to be an internal affairs thing or like that, or they're yucking it up. No, these people really cared about what they were doing. And it was very tense feeling too. There was no lighthearted moments, picking up the kid and, saying, how was your day today, honey? None of that nonsense. It was, no, we got a problem. I'm pulling you guys in. And even the cops that pull them in and putting them on the force, they're not screwing on either. In an age when we talk about the cops getting dumbed down a lot too, there was no waka wakas or sad trombones when it comes to the police officers here. It's like, no, this is what we do. You guys need to take it up another level, because this guy's not fooling around. And then that's when we get the shot of Rutger Hauer, checking in from overseas or whatever. And you're like, okay, he's not just a street thug. He's kind of the real deal. And the scene's not even a minute long, but you're like, okay, I get this is going to be the bad guy. He's not just going to be some other street thug. And you get like a quick little scene of Rutger Hauer. I think it's in the taxi, and you see this Roosevelt Island tram or whatever, which we'll talk about here a little bit later because that features prominently. But you get United Nations and Upper East Side sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You get them going face to face in a disco, which by 1981 disco was dying out, but the popularity of disco, especially in a big city like New York at the time, I mean, it's definitely a thing. And I don't know, I found myself just not going, oh, it's a Stallone vehicle, oh, it's Rutger Hauer, it's great, let's pop because, you know, he's in this, and, you know, oh, he's so new and he's so fresh. No, it's just, it's gripping. And I'm trying not to sound too positive about it, but it's just working on every level to this point. There's no point here where it slows down to me at all. Even when he picks up the girl at the disco and things happen and all that, it's just, you know, he's up to no good, no matter what he's doing or who he's doing it with. He doesn't come across as a scrub. And that's one of the things that people praised about Rutger Hauer between this and like to what you mentioned before early on or even offline about him in his portrayal at the end of Blade Runner. Everybody always remembers him in this big speech at the end, but his screen presence alone, it's not like he's so good looking that you're just enthralled by his beauty and distracted by it. He seems to be an intelligent, passionate man, and he's got one thing on his mind. He's going to go do it. I mean, it's really great. And again, for a movie that's, you know, hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, this thing's flowing pretty well, and it doesn't have any sort of, like I say, slow moments or moments where you get disconnected from what the hell is going on. Really, really good up to this point. So about halfway through this film here, as things start getting a little bit deeper, any particular things jump out to you that you wanted to mention?
Well, I was actually just reading up on this because I want to learn more about it. And apparently this was actually supposed to be a script. The original script was supposed to be the French Connection third movie.
Mm-hmm.
But Gene Hackman didn't want to reprise his role. So yeah, so then, you know, when it was scrapped, Universal acquired the rights and it was reworked, you know, as the new movie for Stallone. And then and I guess there were some other problems. They had problems with this movie too because there was the American debut of Rutger Hauer. It's his first film in America. And while he's filming this, you know, his mother and basically his mom and his best friend both died during the film production. So he had to return back to the Netherlands for their funerals.
Yeah.
So it haunted, like, you know, which you're kind of scared too because you're in pre-production, because sometimes that might affect it and you might not be able to get that person come back. So I'm so thankful that, you know, that they waited, not to just recast him, you know. And so it was, because Rutger Hauer has he has that thing, you know, that just that a Hollywood it, because they say when it comes to like playing the bad guys, he is. I mean. You know, I would love to see him as a vampire. That would have been great.
You know, it's interesting to me when we talk about Rutger Hauer because, like, to your point, he wasn't necessarily. This is like his American debut. He may have been, I think, in a few things there, but you take somebody that you're not used to seeing, you cast him in a role like this where he really does have to play the heavy. You don't know what you're going to get, and a lot of the movie has to rely on it. And you know, he does a good thing. You know, it's like we talk about with wrestling. You know, if you're a heel, you got to go over strong early on, because if not, there's no payoff at the end, you know, if you're writing, you know, real good wrestling or just even stories. And so there's a scene here where we get about halfway through where we see Rutger Hauer basically stabbing Billy Dee Williams. But I just got to make, as an aside, you know, on our Twin Peaks stream that Professor Pixel and I do, I've commented on some sweet jackets. These guys are dressed somewhat stylish, but it's not in your face Armani. And Stallone's got this just creamy, buttery leather jacket on. Billy Dee Williams, like I said, we know is Mr. Smooth, but it works for these guys. They just really look like they're characters. Like, it's not like, hey, let's just have some little twink, you know, grow a beard and put on glasses and act like he's a tough cop. These guys are believable. And of course, your partner gets stabbed. What are you going to do? You're going to kick ass or whatever like that. And it's setting up the payoff where we go, hey, this guy's not only taking care of business by being a terrorist, and we see how effective he is with that. It's like we say in the 80s, this time it's personal, because he took a stab at Billy.
Yep.
And then, of course, he tries to up the ante by going after Stallone's woman, played again by Lindsay Wagner, too.
Yeah.
They were on the outs a little bit as far as characters, but they reconciled, and it wasn't. I mean, it's a little bit of the, well, why can't you change? You know, I have sort of thing, woman's independence thing, but it's not base and disgusting.
Yeah.
Lindsay Wagner, for her screen time, is so good in this. I was like impressed. I was like, wow, this is much better than just a simple fare of being the bionic woman. What did you think?
I said I was thankful because this would have been a later movie. She would have been like all upset with them and all this. And imagine, I'm just thinking, like, how would Chuck Norris handle this situation? It's just because we've seen him when we usually gets in a fight with a woman and they end up having sex. So like, so it was kind of different though, because it was like they didn't go that way. Like when we first introduced her character Irene, she's at the fashion place where she makes she's making the stuff, shoes or whatever she does.
Bespoke. She looks like she's a seamstress. Yep.
Yeah, seamstress. Yeah, and she's in there. Her boss is basically like sexual harassing her. Basically like, oh yeah, you want to be promoted? Go take this client out to dinner. Show him a good time. And Stallone just kind of he waits in the back to see what her answer's going to be, because obviously he likes her and they're having problems. They're boyfriend girlfriend. But I guess they're on the rocks. So yeah. it was kind of neat, and I love how Stallone just gave him the dead eye. He's like, you looking at punk, like I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting for the guy to just kind of look away and walk away, but didn't get that. Didn't get that. No, that would have been funny for me. But yeah, I said Lindsay Wagner having her in here too. Persis Khambatta. She plays Shaka, the one that she's. Or Shaka, I butchered her name probably. She plays Rutger Hauer's assistant. She's the one towards the end of the bus gets killed. She's for those who knows her, she's another famous actress. She's from Star Trek, the motion picture.
Yeah.
So she's from that, and she did some other movies too. It was just interesting to see. We have these other like more popular stars getting first build, and you look all the way down. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 build is Rutger Hauer. It just blows my mind because I'm thinking like everything I've seen him in, I'm like he should be billed higher, but I'm like, wait, this is his American debut. That's why he's not higher up in there. But like, it's so great that it's like he doesn't have to be a first build. I have him right next to Stallone, his second build, because his performance in here.
Yeah, the big scene that a lot of people talk about here too. I mentioned before there's an earlier shot where in the background you see the Roosevelt tram, and now we're getting to the point where Rutger Hauer's on there with his second in command, the character you're just speaking about. And what I like about this scene is that it takes time to develop, and we've mentioned this before with the template. Everything is the build up. Because the payoff isn't the reward. The payoff happens, because of this big, huge buildup. That it's, that it's building up towards this big climax, and something's going to happen, and then that's supposed to be it. It's not a bunch of false finishes like you get, where the guy just comes back to life and you have to stab him another time, or like we say in wrestling, we always like to compare sometimes films to it, where a bunch of false finishes where a finishing move's not, or whatever. So here we've seen this. We didn't realize if you're watching this that this is going to be a major factor in the film, but one of the films that is hotly debated when we discuss James Bond is Moonraker, because I find it vastly entertaining, and I like to argue in its defense of being a fantastic film, even though it's a super cheeseball kind of movie, and probably could argue, it's got everything wrong with James Bond. That being said, compared to some of the crap that's coming out in the recent decade or two, we could argue this and that. But it has a very famous scene in there, and it's in Rio. And one of the things about James Bond films is that you have a very international flavor to it, where you're traveling, you're seeing different sites, different locations, different environments, different people, and a lot of times they shoot those on location. That was always exotic and interesting to me as a kid and still as an adult. Here, you got New York City, and it's grimy, it's disgusting. But we've got different levels. We've seen them on jumping onto the tram, which there's some pretty good scenes in there when Rutger takes somebody hostage. We've seen them on top of buildings, infiltrating really disgusting drug pens. Now we've got them on this tram overlooking the city. But the beautiful part about this is the way it's shot. It's like you've got a camera inside the tram looking around. So you got a good sense of what it's like to almost be in there with them. And yeah, there's other shots of them coming in and Stallone flying in on the helicopter while they're having the big back and forth. So this is a nice, really long, drawn out scene, and it's all about tension and build. It's not 20 minutes of superpowers or 50 million gunshots or anything else that, you know, makes you go, It's tense, it's unnerving, it's dramatic, it's the way you're supposed to do it.
And yeah, especially when he goes up and Stallone goes up into the sky tram or whatever, and he has he's sitting there and he's basically like, you know, Rutger Hauer's trying to tell him, it's like, you know, they can repeat stuff just to get his mind playing the mind games, you know.
Yeah.
Stuff to this and all, and then the cops are all cowards and he has to repeat it. And he's like, here, have this. He takes the baby. I'm thinking like, oh, he just killed a woman. Why wouldn't he not kill this baby? But so then he gives the baby to Stallone, and they, like, you know, is he like, you know, is he gonna cut, because he's lowering, Stallone's being lowered down, like is he gonna like cut the cable or over and all, release it and let Stallone die and follow the baby, you know? It's just that intense situation. He's unpredictable, you don't know what he's doing. He's not crazy, but he's like smart, he's evil. That's the thing.
Yeah. And that's what, it's the threat of what he can do that's the terrifying thing, not the act in itself, because that's the whole nature of terrorism. Yeah. It's you imagining what negative effects or outcome that can happen with something that's the real threat that really makes you panicky. Yeah. And so to your point here, you know, I distinctly remember as a kid hearing Stallone talk about, you know, we hear about him training for Rocky and trying to do as much as he can on his own. And he was one of the original actors that would do all that. Clint Eastwood did a lot of his own, but some people would say that, well, if it doesn't really matter to the film, why bother doing it? So now we have green screen, we have actors that don't do their own stunts, maybe, for the most part. But Stallone here, I distinctly recall him talking about how he was, you know, lowered and raised on his cable, and he really wanted to give that authenticity to the film by him doing it. So I just find it tremendous, because you look at it and you're like, it's not really a remarkable scene, but it's clearly him going up and down on the steel cable, no stunt double, nothing. And he's there in the tram and they're having their little conversation. And to your point, you don't know what the hell he's going to do, because it's not like when we looked inside the middle of a tram when it stopped there with Rutger Hauer, that the first thing we saw was the baby, and then the camera pans over to his face and everything else there too, kind of basically saying, hey, you know, you idiot watcher, we're threatening the baby here or not. No, the baby is one of the last things that you see in here, and it just seems to kind of happen organically with them. And that's, again, a nice little decision, the way they filmed this here too, with, you know, building up what's going on, because, oh my God, is he going to do something with the baby or not? You know, shock value, it's really not about that. It's really, like I say, about the threat to it. But then again, you see him, you know, with the baby being lowered down, and it's like, okay, I see what's going on. And again, for its time, not really seeing a lot of films that have this type of situation that does occur. I do think was cutting edge at its time. And Stallone, I thought, always was very good at trying to take something. And we've even joked about Over the Top, the arm wrestling movie. Arm wrestling's a legitimate field, let's say. People may joke about it currently today or not or whatever, but it's a thing. It has a culture around it. Why the hell not figure out a way to make a story for it? And so sometimes you're going to have misses when you do that, or maybe they're better for a documentary. But I've always appreciated Stallone taking something and just presenting it up there. And he's always enjoyed cops and what they have to go through. And to your point, like you said at the beginning, it's so realistic that you go from this to Beverly Hills Cop. Are you kidding me? Yeah, it might be a fun film and enjoyable, but it's got that 80s kind of shtick to it that is so totally unbelievable. That's part of its charm, is that you go, this is stupid, this is dumb, but I'm having fun, so I don't care, and it's the 80s. Whereas now, if you watch it, you'd be like, this is in no way attached to reality. So I agree with you totally when you mentioned about the 70s films and 80s trying to be realistic, trying to do different things. And it wasn't quite the 80s yet, where things are going to take a turn into what we've mentioned before, the full-on 80s. But yeah, this whole third act on the Roosevelt tram, going from day to night, it's just what film to me is really all about. It's really, It's really a great film. The more that I think about it, watching it, I'm trying not to
Mhm.
be too biased recently from watching. But for my final thoughts, I got to say, yeah, if you love Stallone, you've got to see this film. If you don't know Stallone, but you want to watch a nice gritty cop kind of film, you could watch this film. If you want to see something that captures a little bit of something realistic, you watch this. All the backgrounds, the scenes, the snow, the rain, the cold weather, everything. And the very last scene, of course, is when Rutger Hauer goes to it goes to meet Stallone's wife, Lindsay Wagner, at her place. And I know you kind of popped for it, so I'll kind of back off for a little bit and let you describe it.
My final thoughts is that this is a thriller. If you like thrillers and you in a million years never thought you'd see Stallone in a thriller movie that actually is good, you know. This takes cake. This takes the cake, man. It's just like because I was like we all know Stallone. You know he does Expendables now, especially now for those who are that's all you know, or you see him in Rambo or Rocky. You know he's not. You know you might see him in Cobra. That was kind of like over the top. It's the cheesecake. You know the cheesy '80s stuff and all that stuff. Watching him in this, it's like it's a totally different character, totally different person. You know, it's and I appreciate he put effort put into that. You know, training with the police department stuff. You know, before this movie, actually getting into the role, and that's the one thing I've always admired about him. Even when he did Rocky, it's like how he just got into the mindset and all that stuff, just prepared for the role and stuff. He wrote it, just wanted to make it authentic as much as he can.
Yeah.
So that really helped out. But yeah, this is a thriller from beginning all the way to the end. Especially
it's not an action film. It is not an action.
Oh, it's not an action film, but it's also not slow paced either. It's fast. It's actually goes by fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm thankful for that. And then it has action where it needs action, and it's basically the whole entire movie you're building up because he's just about to get this guy. He's and he's almost there, and then the guy gets away. And he's just is he going to get him this time, or is he just going to get away this again? And always to the end where he figures where'd he go because the bus is because the guy's it's a scene with the bus scene. The guy Rutger drives the bus into the water, and then they can't find the body, and he's like, where's he going? And he thinks about it. He's like, he said something about him to her earlier. Though he's like, oh crap, he's going after my girlfriend. So it's like, and then you see him calling, and he's like, the phone's just ringing, no one answers. At first it's like, it's like, holy crap, is this gonna end up like what's that movie Seven Deadly Sins it gets called or something, or Seven, movie 7.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to end on a bad note where he's going to come home and find his girlfriend dead?
Yeah.
And it's up to that very point up, and then on another sudden it's like, oh, it's Mrs. Doubtfire towards the end.
Yeah, he's in there, he's dressed up, and you know what? That's one thing that we've always talked about with stories. It's like a circle. You begin with the end in mind, or the end is like the beginning. So in the beginning, we see Stallone dressed up as a lady, but an older one at night. We're a bunch of thugs, street criminals, hoodlums, as we like to call them, punks, come out to try to rob and or rape or whatever you want to say. And of course, it goes bad for them. But it happens here too, and you'd forgotten about this probably because it's at the beginning of the film, but it makes sense. And you get the real long, eyes shot, stare off, nobody's blinking. Rutger makes a move, boom, and these gunshots too. I think somewhere along the way in the 80s, people forgot what a gun really sounds like when you go out to a range or in real life and all that. It's not pew, 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 like, little whatever. It's a boom. And in here, when Rutgers get shot, that first one, you're like, hell yeah, he's got a 38 or 45, or he's got some heavy action thing going, because a big, huge chunk you see just explode in his shoulder. And then in his, as he turns around, it's like in his back. And when he falls outside into the snow and everything, you're like, yeah, 2-3 shots close range like that pretty much wreck your whole upper body with the cannon that he had. And this is how it's an 80s film. It ends as soon as Kurt falls and he's dead. Roll credits. We don't need a message. We don't need a yucca at the end. Boom, it ends. It reminds me of the gem that we had covered, 10 to Midnight with Bronson, I think from 1983, where once he kills the guy at the end, immediately, boom, the credits roll. This was so good. Yeah, it's a really great film that does not get talked about a lot. And if Stallone were to pass tomorrow, people would talk about Rocky. They'd probably talk something recent like The Expendables, to your point. They'd probably talk about Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, or some ones that might have been considered failures or whatever. But a lot of people just don't talk about Nighthawks, and so that's why I'm glad we chose this as a movie to cover tonight. Any other final thoughts?
No, they said I think we covered it pretty much. I think we pretty much shot the movie to death. Yeah, like I said, for those who are iffy about this movie because you're like, oh, it's Stallone, like, you know, or you're not a fan of Stallone, go back and watch this movie, because this movie, I said, like, this is a movie. It sleeps on you unless you actually were old enough to remember watching it as a kid, or just we're around or saw the reviews stuff. You know, maybe you had a friend who liked it and stuff. You know, or a parent who loved it. You know, this is a movie that it needs more love. I think more people need to realize that this movie exists and go watch it, because everybody thinks of Dirty Harry. I want to watch Nighthawks.
Yeah, good film. Good film. Underrated film. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Nighthawks 1981, Sylvester Stallone, Billy Dee Williams, Lindsay Wagner, and of course the American debut, I believe, of Rutger Hauer. Rest in peace. We talked about some of his films before, and I kind of put Nighthawks in a little short list for us to cover, and so we finally said, you know what, it's appropriate to cover it now. So thanks for listening, guys. Let us know what you think below. Let us know what you like to cover, especially on our Kicking It Action show, which is what we typically do on Tuesday nights and or Top 10 Tuesdays. So for RDV and everybody involved here at the Extreme Movie Show, I'm your host, Rob. Have a good night, and as always, stay extreme.